Thank you. Okay, glad I mentioned that. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Please send in chat questions. You will not be able to see them, but we will. So we're going to start off. All of these questions, by the way, came in from readers. Bob, Mayor Woerner. It is difficult for residents to know the status of significant issues being tackled by the city. This leaves the door open to the spreading of conjecture and misinformation. Is there any plan to create a more informative portal where residents could get accurate updates on key issues? If not, is there a reason why this can't be done?
Sure, I'll answer that, but if I could, I'll just make a caveat at the beginning. You know, I'm the mayor, but I'm appearing tonight as, myself. Mayor is only one of 5 council members. These are my opinions. It's not the official city policy or the city council, anything like that. So I'm who I am, and I'm telling you what I know as best I can. So
thank you.
With that, I just want to say that's the context here. With respect to communication, frankly, that's something many organizations always have struggled with, and the city, we acknowledge, has struggled with that. We are doing more. We're hiring people into that area, and it's a focus area with the new city manager and the staff that she has to improve the communications. There's always more that can be done, but we have made improvements. And the goal is to reach as many people as possible using as many communication channels as possible. And I'll mention what all the different channels are that we're doing, but our website recently got revamped, and it's where we're putting all the comprehensive sources of information. As an example, every council meeting agenda packet, minutes, resolutions, along with all other agendas, staff reports, minutes from all the advisory bodies are accessible online. And the website includes specific pages dedicated to large-scale projects and campaigns, like downtown asset management, general plan update. But you can see from what I've just said, massive amounts of information. So the trick is, how does someone find it? It's the needle in the haystack. And so efforts are being made to make good links, easy to follow and get there. So it's definitely a work in progress. And, the first thing we have is the traditional method, and that's a paper newsletter that comes out every quarter. What I just showed you was the special edition on the downtown. And that's definitely old school snail mail, but very important. Well, we also have a weekly e-newsletter. We've got downtown kiosks with informational posters, posts in Nextdoor, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter by the city as a whole, and individual departments as the police and library. We've got farmers markets booth, new city manager weekly video series, Citizens Police Academy, Key to the City program is going to be returning next year, and a specific post prior to each council meeting with the agenda link. So we're doing a lot, but it's the traditional thing. How do people find it, and to what extent can we push it to them? Not simple, but we're trying and always open to suggestions.
I have 2 questions. First, you had mentioned the Key to the City program. Could you explain that? The second question is, how can people, is there an easy way for them to sign up for those weekly those e-newsletters?
Now that I think there could well be. I'm sure maybe there's some city staff that are listening to this, but the whole idea is, what I just said is, how can people sign up for something? That's the push, so that they can get it. They don't have to go look. I think people have signed up. I know it gets pushed to me, So yeah, I'm sure there is, and we'll figure out how to put it up there on how to do that. Of course, that's kind of circular, but yeah, it's the idea. Now, the other thing that you mentioned was Key to the City, and that's a program that the city clerk started many years ago, because the way the city runs is we have the city staff and we have the city council, but it's vital that we get citizen participation in all our advisory bodies. And what we need to do is find people who are interested in helping the city manage itself through those advisory bodies. So the city clerk came up with the idea, how about if we have an educational program letting everybody know all of the departments and what they do? And that then turned into a way to recruit people for our advisory bodies. Now, in the past, it's been in person. It was, held up because of the pandemic. And what we're focusing on now, I believe, is some combination of in-person meetings, as well as recording videos from the various departments explaining what they do. So there'll be a chance to meet people, as well as archival information that's more doesn't change very much. One other thing, if I might mention, is that we also have in the city a Chamber of Commerce, which runs a leadership program in conjunction with the city. Now that program is distinct, and it's more of a people who are business leaders and others have a chance to learn about the operations and meet each other and figure out how to have an impact on the city as well. So we have those two programs in Livermore. They're separate, but they're cooperative. In some cities, they just have one. And then I think, Gina, you've probably even written articles about some of the battles over that in our neighboring cities. But that's the thing. We have those distinct programs. They both have their purpose. One is learn how the city works. That's the key to the city. And then the chamber program on the leadership program is how to become a leader in the city in various areas. So they're both useful.
Thank you. Thank you for answering my extra questions there. Moving
that's
on. That's probably why you asked it, because you're familiar with that kind of stuff. Yeah, but maybe there are people online who aren't. So, and I am a strong proponent of the leadership programs. I think that they are well done and very informative and would encourage anybody to participate. So, and I'm wondering if maybe Sierra could find a link to the newsletter sign up for the city and maybe post it in our chat. Okay, got a thumbs up. Okay, so Bob, next question is also about the downtown. What are some of the retail businesses going in downtown?
Well, we have a number of new retail. One's Bodega Bohème and Covet Boutique or Cove Boutique, and they offer clothes, accessories, home decor, and gift items like the Uptown Girls Boutique. We've got the Sweet Hope Soap Company and Partyland, which is a business that's relocating from Maple to Railroad. And then in the restaurants that have moved into downtown or will soon, Falafel and Gyro Kebab House, the F-Bomb Focaccia, Sons of Liberty Ale House is coming soon. Kokolo Donburi is there on the corner across from the Livermore Cinemas, and Los Caporales, and that's a relocation and expansion. One of the things I'd want to point out, and there's Tap 25 that's reopened under new ownership at, I think that's at Blacksmith Square. And there's the Farmers Union and the SBC building. Now, what you can see is there's a lot of businesses coming into the downtown. And I just want to point out that we acted very swiftly when the pandemic hit. We just looked at our budget. We had a couple of million that we could afford, and we immediately started helping our businesses downtown. And during the course of the pandemic, we actually had a net gain rather than a loss downtown. The other thing we did, we were well positioned because of the flex zones that were designed many years ago to expand outdoor dining in the good weather. And what we did was make that available all year round so that the restaurants would have a place for their clientele. I think as you can see downtown, we did what we could to make it happen quickly. Now the name of the game is make it look good. And we have plans to keep not as much dining as we had in the pandemic was at its height, but more outdoor flex zone space than we had before we started, as well as maintaining all of the parking. And the other aspect of it is we're making sure the aesthetic of the whole thing looks good. We did before whatever work. Now it's going to look good, but it'll take a good part of a year or more to everybody to get the money and to really spruce it up. But it's doing well.
Great. And that goes year round.
Right. So what happens is it's very important because when the street was narrowed and we put in the diagonal parking, there were many spaces that were specifically designed to accommodate dining. And so the parking goes away. But the concept of Black Friday and the merchants make their year between Thanksgiving and the end of the year, it's very important for their profitability to have parking. So the flex zones are going back to more parking now to help our merchants. And then after the holiday season, it'll expand back into the dining.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. Moving on to another downtown question. Obviously from a citizen. I understand why an administrative process allowed ignoring the citizen ballot petition on Eden housing, but can you please comment on why that effort did not trigger the city council to reconsider the direction? Seems the city council has made up its mind regardless of what the citizens of the city want.
Okay, there's a lot in that question, and I'll try and start in on it, and just keep me focused if that's necessary, or if it's not making sense. But the first word in there was understand why an administrative process allowed. Now, that's not quite accurate, or the right way to think about it. The right to referend or put an initiative on the ballot is for legislative actions. There is no constitutional right for administrative actions to be put on the ballot. If there were, and that's what all the court cases point out, if there were possible to referend administrative actions, you would tie up government so that nothing could get done. Now, there's some people that might say, great, but however, we need to do stuff to help all the citizens. So it's very fundamental. There is no right to referend administrative actions. So now, so what happened was the city attorney pointed out to the Move Eden Housing Group that there were no legislative acts in the resolution that the city passed. Therefore, it was not referendable. And this was done in advance of any petition circulating. Then, so despite being told that it was not going to work, they went ahead and did it. They spent $100,000 paying for signatures. Then they turned them in. No surprise at that point that the city clerk said, it's not referendable. And they objected, of course, and said, well, wait a minute, we're taking you to court. We want you to put this thing, want the city clerk to put it on the ballot before we even discuss whether it's legitimate. And of course, that's all done for purposes of delay. So what the city attorney advised the city clerk was, no, it shouldn't be on the ballot. It's a misuse of city resources and it's misleading our residents. So if they want to take it to court, fine. So that's why the city council, first of all, didn't get involved. Now, another point, the city attorney and city clerk are constitutional officers. They do not report to the city council in these matters. We have no right to interfere, and it would be highly improper if the council did. So once it goes to, they've done their constitutional duty and said this is the way they call it, the people have every right to object legally, and it's in the court system. It's not for the council to mess with. And so now where are we? It's in the court system. Now what happened? They filed to referend, and the way their petition was written was, we want basically to undo all the legislative acts contained within the resolution. Well, there aren't any. So what do you do with that? So it went to court and they said that they wanted a temporary restraining order before it went to trial to prevent the city from transferring the land to Eden. It went to the Superior Court and the Superior Court said, not granting the restraining order because you're not going to win on the merits of your case. They said, then they appealed that to the appellate court and the appellate court said, no, we're not giving you a temporary restraining order. And the land has transferred to Eden. Now, what just recently happened this week is because these obvious delaying tactics and being in the face of being told that they weren't going to prevail on the merits, Eden then filed a motion for them to put up a $500,000 bond for penalties in case they're found to lose and be awarded penalties. So they went back to the Superior Court. The Superior Court just said, you're going to pay, put up the $500,000 bond, and you got until November 14th to do that. And if you don't, then you're done. So now this, I want to point out, is the second bond that they've had to put under this group of many names. Also filed an action under Save Livermore Downtown. They lost that and they were forced to put up a $500,000 bond. So they now have $1 million of penalty bonds that they're looking at. And I got a quote out of the paper that I'll just read. And it was with respect to an article on Trump's shenanigans. In politics, quote, you can say what you want, and if people like it, it works. In a legal realm, it's different, said Chris Edelson, a presidential powers scholar and American University government professor. Quote, it's an arena where there are tangible consequences for missteps, misdeeds, false statements in a way that doesn't apply in politics. So that's $1 million right there because of these misdeeds and missteps. And then I'll just say, I think, let's just, that's enough on that, I think.
Okay. Let's see. We have quite a few on the downtown, but let's, just so we can get to some of the other ones, because there are a lot of different topics that
if we could, maybe, I think there were a couple of questions that on the Eden housing thing, and then there's the larger issue of housing rules and stuff. Maybe we could split there. What do you think?
Yes. Okay. We have A general plan updates and housing element question. We'll go there.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were going to ask about the political ad.
Oh, okay. I can do that. A September 22nd political advertisement from Save Livermore Downtown implies that a new city council can enforce Eden Housing to stop or relocate its downtown project. How much legal trouble might such an action expose the city to?
Well, the short answer to that is a lot. And I'll just point out, I want to quote from their attempt to get a, in the appeals court, they submitted trying to get that restraining order to stop the sale. And one of the things they said in their appeal, this is what they told the appellate court judges. Once the property is sold, even if the legality of the referendum is upheld by a reviewing court, it will be nearly impossible to unwind the conveyance.
And
So
they said that.
They said that. Now, that's what they're saying to the judges in the court. That's not what they're saying publicly in the independent. They're saying it's not too late. So one of those statements is manifestly not true. I believe that the one that's true is the one that they filed with the court. It's going to be nearly impossible to unwind it. And any attempt to do that will involve eminent domain. Now, there's several versions of that eminent domain because you can't take away land for that's designated, bought for affordable housing, is owned now by an affordable housing entity. You can't take that away without having someplace else to put the project. Well, the other place that they've said they want to put the project is across Railroad Avenue. The owners there have said they're not selling. So that means they would have to forcibly take it using the police powers of the city under eminent domain. That's pretty ugly right there. Two eminent domain actions, but involving affordable housing. And we've already had the state attorney general weighing in on this. We've got all kinds of housing advocates looking at what's going on. It will be extremely expensive, extremely divisive, lengthy, and it would be a disaster. Any attempt to do that would be foolhardy.
You had mentioned the attorney general stepping in or speaking out. When was that and what was that pertaining to?
Well, that was in their first lawsuit where they improperly, I'll say, used CEQA to try and stop the project. So they filed a CEQA lawsuit against the project saying we hadn't done our stuff, even though, and the judge ruled that we had, and I listened to the court case being deliberated. Frankly, their attorneys' efforts to try and say that there was some reason for it were incredibly feeble, and the judge called them on it. And that's why the judge said, almost utterly without merit or entirely without merit, and I would object to the judge's use of the word almost. But now, so this went, now they appealed that, said, of course, the judge never knows what they're doing. And we've now had 8 judges and the attorney general who have weighed against them. They claim all of them don't know what they're doing. But when it went to the appellate court, Eden and the city asked for the appellate court to speed up the process because this was clearly an effort to delay. And the attorney general filed an amicus brief on their first lawsuit with the appellate court saying, speed it up. So the appellate court agreed. And we've now got the trial on the first lawsuit towards the end of November, and the trial on the second lawsuit, the first at the Superior Court level, is in the end of November as well. So a lot of things are colliding into November, and there's no doubt which way this is going.
Okay, I'm going to apologize in advance if it gets noisy in the background here. Uh, So we're gonna move on now to the general plan update question. Please discuss the impact of state mandated requirements for affordable housing, percent of housing, question mark, and if the city is meeting minimum requirements.
So what happens is, all the cities are given an allocation by the state as to how much housing they need to build to meet the growth needs of the state. And it's this law state law has been is called a vital statewide importance since 1969, and it's requiring all the state governments to adequately plan to meet the housing needs of everyone in our community. Now, to do this, meet this requirement, each city has to develop a housing element as part of its general plan that shows how it will meet its community housing needs. And you can see pretty quickly, I'm getting into some arcane stuff about planning and everything. But the idea is key in this word of plan. You have to show that there's enough land zoned to develop, that could be developed to meet the housing needs. Now, the problem, of course, is you can't guarantee that that land will be developed. So your housing needs allocation of what you're supposed to build is rarely met, especially at the low income spectrum of all the different housing types. So that's the problem. Now, what we have to do is show that we can meet it. Now, we're showing that in our plan. And we've just gotten a feedback from the state that certifies these plans with what I would describe at this point, from my understanding, relatively straightforward corrections or modifications, asking for some explanations of things. I think we're on track to meet it. There are other cities, though, that are fighting their allocations, not meeting it, and they are going to suffer significant consequences. And I just want to say, I've got a letter here that I recently got a copy of. It's from the Department of Housing and Community Development, Division of Housing Policy Development. And it's from their that department to the city manager of Elk Grove. And here it is, some of the quotes. HCD finds that in denying the project, I don't want to get into all that details, the city violated government code sections, a whole bunch. And you go down to the end, and there's a section here in this letter called consequences. Consequences for lack of compliance with state housing element law. To a few minor things. Permanent local housing let's see. First, non-compliance will result in ineligibility or delay in receiving state funds that require a compliant housing element as a prerequisite, including but not limited to permanent local housing allocation program, local housing trust fund program, infill infrastructure grant program, SB1 Caltrans sustainable community grants, affordable housing and sustainable communities program. So they put that kind of stuff at risk. Second, jurisdictions that do not meet their housing element requirements may face additional financial and legal ramifications. Not pretty. So this is serious stuff, and it's ramping up at the state level. And that just goes back to, if we start messing around with the downtown, we could get ourselves in serious trouble.
You might have touched on this, but I had a question surrounding that.
Sure.
There would be a loss of local control, correct? In other words, the state can basically come in and say, you weren't doing your job, and now we're going to do it for you. I know that some other Tri-Valley cities are facing that.
Yeah,
But
I mean, that's basically it. I mean, this letter is some of the details. It's the kind of letters you start getting when the state card starts coming in. But in addition to the HCD and the Attorney General starting to enforce, the other thing that happens is that the legislature, they're passing all these laws. And if you're not compliant, then builders who want to do affordable housing within a certain distance of mass transit get to dictate what happens, and it doesn't matter what the city wants. And you see that battle now in Pleasanton on that 5-story building next to the library. It happens. You can't. I mean, you can stick your head in the sand, but it's not going to stop it.
Sarah, do you want to ask the next question? Because I have a little bit of chaos going on around me.
All good, no worries. Yes. So we're kind of staying within talking about housing a little bit, but shifting gears slightly. So our next question, please, or excuse me, the cost of permits and related fees when building a home is prohibitive, over $200K for a single family home as an example. Otherwise visible lots remain undeveloped as a result, or home prices are forced upward. Is the city open to considering ideas to remedy this situation?
For sure. I mean, I think in general, all ideas are welcome, but they have to be vetted, right? So you in the spirit of brainstorming, you don't want to say no. You want ideas, right? And then you figure out what's practical. Now, these costs of permits and related fees when building a home, as described in this question, are prohibitive. But the city is not allowed to make a profit on these fees. And what you're talking about are impact fees. Now, these are battles that were fought back in the 60s. And Livermore was at the forefront of the battle because when developers like Sunset Development wanted to build out a large part of Livermore and others, they didn't want to pay for the impact on the infrastructure. They wanted the city to pay for it, which means the current residents. So they wanted the existing residents to pay for the new residents. And that's a good business model for the builder, because then they get to sell houses at less price, and then they get more demand. So they want that. But there were many court battles that said no. And Livermore was, as I say, at the forefront. You're going to pay your fair share. So basically, these fees are for the impact on the infrastructure. So if the new developments don't pay it, that means the existing homeowners do. So it's a zero-sum game here, which means if you want to reduce the fees on the new houses, you're going to have to raise taxes on the existing. So you're kind of in a bind. Now, there might be ways through this, but they're not simple.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move away from housing and talk about traffic and speeding and exhaust and such. We got a lot of questions on this particular topic. So, Bob, could the city work on traffic calming / speeding throughout town? Also, will there be any enforcement of the law against illegal modifications to exhaust systems?
Okay. So I want to say that, the city, we have limited resources. We've The police department is well funded, but it's not infinite. So the police department has to make choices as to what they focus on. Everybody who runs any organization has to make choices. Now, the top priority for the traffic division is preventing accidents and injuries due to speeding and other unsafe behavior. So the officers focus on hotspots with the resources they have. And we have a traffic division. I think in the past, the traffic division has gotten some awards. I can't remember, but we have a good. We had one guy who was really good, and they do work it. And so the other thing that happens is the traffic engineers. We also periodically measure conditions and work with residents. So yes, it's something that where we can, we do, but not everybody agrees on the solutions. And I'll just give you an example. It's not a neighborhood, but it's on Robertson Park Road, for example. People tend to speed through there. I can hear them. I live near it. And so some people have said, well, let's put speed bumps in there. But wait a minute, that's also an equestrian area, and the horses in the trailers don't like speed bumps. So you always have to balance it, but it depends on whether the neighborhood gets behind it. The other thing that happens is, is it a main artery or not? Another example I can think of is, going out Tesla Road towards the Central Valley, they put speed tables in there and people would slow down for the speed tables, but then they had to get enforcement out there because the idiots in the commute were passing people on the speed tables, going past it. So it's a serious issue. The city cares. And as special situations arise, they try and take care of it. And the chief is responsive to the complaints that come in. So if people want to highlight a particular area, it's useful to do that. Now, the second part of your question was on noisy exhaust. Now, I want to thank the person who submitted that question because it's really irritating. And even this morning, I was awakened by an obnoxious vehicle. It was a quarter of a mile away and I could hear it. I sleep with the windows open, but ridiculous. Now, I'll mention I like to read the funny paper. And I saw there was a cartoon, I think it was Bizarro a while ago, where this guy was at a motorcycle store and the salesman was telling him, how great these electric vehicles are, motorcycles, but the downside is you can't annoy people with the exhaust and the noise. But that's what it is. Now, I've talked with our police chief, and I've talked to him a couple of times about this, but just recently, and he agrees that the noisy exhausts are very frustrating. And our officers can write tickets based on, the handheld noise volume meter, dB meter, but that's not so easy. But in the question that was submitted here on this, well, what about using sound activated camera enforcement? I think that's pretty good. And we're all for technology in this town. So that's something we can look at. Now, another basis for a ticket can be if the exhaust has been clearly modified. Now, I want to point out, the chief told me, our department has written tickets this year, but the chief also agrees that more needs to be done. And he will be putting more emphasis on operations, making sure that we're looking in the right places, and training of the officers to increase enforcement. And another aspect of this, that I mentioned earlier that our police department is on social media. The department is going to be posting on social media that there's going to be stepped up enforcement, especially in the downtown.
Okay.
Thanks. I'm
It
gonna.
was a good question and near and dear to my heart.
There were actually two questions concerning loud exhaust, so it's
Yeah.
it's an issue.
Yeah, and I want to chime in quickly because I have been looking at chat and we had something come in. You mentioned, Mayor Woerner, that it's helpful to identify specific areas or neighborhoods, and that's kind of what this question does. It says, a few years ago, there was a petition with 1,000 signatures of residents along Concannon to quiet the Concannon roadway by reducing the speed, using speed bumps, or using noise-reducing asphalt. Would a renewed effort on that be considered?
I think so. I mean, I'm especially in my position can promise that. I'm sure it's something they'll look at next year. But in seriousness, yes. I mean, as I alluded to, though, we don't have infinite dollars. We've got serious infrastructure stuff. So I don't know where that would fall in the budget. It sounds like a large number of people interested in that. And I think bringing that to the city staff's attention again would be good, that they could look into it in the due course of the scheme of things.
There's a follow-up to that. This person said that they still have the old petition from years ago. Where could they take that?
Well, this, I would suggest, and maybe that's not the right place. I would suggest that it be sent to the city manager for her attention. And I think there'll be a response to it. I don't myself recall that coming to the council's attention, but it could have, but I don't recall it. So let's submit it and let's see what happens. I mean, everybody will look at it, and do their best to evaluate what the situation is.
It looks like we do have confirmation that it was before your time, so that's why you don't recall it.
That's a long time ago because I'm old.
We're going to stick with the traffic theme here. And okay, there's a new Chick-fil-A. A new Chick-fil-A is going to open soon on North Livermore Avenue. What options exist to make changes should traffic snarl the highway off-ramp and nearby intersections?
Okay, and good. You can tell these questions weren't written by us because they're putting us on the hot spot, right? So I'll just say that there was a traffic study that evaluated the impacts of the drive-through as part of the application, the review process. That study found the anticipated number of vehicle trips to be within the acceptable limits for the site. And the site is designed to accommodate the anticipated volume and drive-through queue of 27 cars. Now that's a lot of cars. And if you look at the design, that queue wraps around the long parking lot that parallels the arroyo there in the freeway. Now you think about Pleasanton, that Chick-fil-A went in there without the same kind of capability, and it was in the same line, I think, as the In-N-Out, at least in this case, the In-N-Out's across the street. So they looked at the queue capability, the projected demand. Now, when anything new opens up, there's always an initial impact. So I would imagine that if we see something bad happen, it's going to happen initially, but eventually it would die down. However, a condition of approval of the project in the event the drive-through stacking extends onto Livermore Avenue, the restaurant operator is required to take immediate action to eliminate the spillover traffic onto Livermore Avenue. And the kind of adjustments that could happen are adjust the signal timing to ensure the eastbound queue is cleared every cycle, make eastbound right turn only, and work with the operator to make operational adjustments. Now, if the operator fails to comply with this condition, the city can exercise legal remedies to ensure safety at this location. And we're going to be monitoring the traffic conditions closely over the first few weeks, especially.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Drought. Does the city have a plan for the trees that are dying due to drought conditions? Many of these trees help protect citizens from exhaust pollution and noise pollution.
I think this is another, question that, I can relate to because I'm dealing with a lot of dead trees in my own yard. And I wished many years ago when they were planted, they were more drought tolerant, but they weren't. And I got a problem. And the same thing kind of happened to the city. I mean, if you look around, there are a lot of redwoods that have been planted and they're not faring so well. And this drought, I've been here 46 years. This is definitely bad news. Now, the city strives to remove all the dead trees in the city areas. And as they die off, they're assigned to a contractor for removal. And we should be fairly up to date on removals of dead trees along the city maintained streets, parks, et cetera. And trees that are currently under a state of stress, they're inspected and monitored. But as I've been driving around the last year or so, especially, I've sad to see trees that are been taken out, and you can also see trees that are definitely not going to make it. So we have a problem. So we're currently conducting a citywide inventory, which classifies as trees according to species type, condition, et cetera. And the inventory so far has surveyed 33,500+ trees. We expect the survey to be completed by the end of the year. And once the survey is complete, we'll identify, the more trees that have to be removed, relocated, or replanted. And while individual trees are removed as they die, the inventory is going to identify areas of further change, like irrigation changes, plant species change, and other operational changes. And that work is going to begin once the plan is in place and the budget is approved. And it's worth noting that a large portion of these trees are city street trees that are the responsibility of private property owners. So that's another further entanglement here. And the city, of course, recognizes the environmental benefits of the sustainable urban forests. We adjust the irrigation systems, the circuits, and we evaluate things. And so that's kind of what's, and we try and have the trees survive, and especially true of new trees. I've seen people in my neighborhood where they're doing renovations, they planted new trees and then they died. So anyway, it's a problem. It's going to take a while to adjust to the new realities of what we need to plant here, but we'll get there. And it's you got budget constraints, ability to do this. It'll take a while.
I have a follow-up for that, just being a homeowner myself. If I have a tree in my front yard, it's my responsibility, and it dies, what happens? Am I responsible for removing that tree?
Oh yeah. Now, the other thing, and I don't know all the rules offhand, but if it's a certain size and you want to remove a tree that's died, you got to have a permit. You don't just kind of take out some of these things. And some of the trees I've had have been around 30 years and didn't make it. So you need a permit. But in addition, because of the need to have the trees for climate and everything else, you're required in Livermore to show that you're planting an equivalently large tree. So you have to pay a fee that you can waive part of it if you plant the right size tree in to replace the one that died.
Okay, thank you. Sierra, do you want to back us up to traffic with that newest question?
Yeah, I was just gonna say before we get too far away from the traffic conversation, will East Avenue be narrowed for vehicle traffic?
Oh, that I don't know. Now, for everyone, not everybody may know East Avenue, but if they're from Livermore, they would. That's the main drag from downtown Livermore out to the lab. And that, of course, was designed 70 years ago or more. And there were residential homes on it with parking for the front of their houses right on the street. There are schools, there are multifamily residential, there's shopping areas. Uh, it's everything, every single possible option is on that street. And the question is, how do you make it more friendly for bicycles and pedestrians? Not a simple question. So the city has been contemplating what to do there, been reaching out to the community, asking for ideas, thinking about, is there a part of the street that could be used and modified as a test? But again, lots of different interests in this, and how are they all going to get satisfied? The other thing that I think has to be considered, in addition to East Avenue, especially if you want to do bicycle traffic, to what extent can there be parallel routes off of East Avenue that could help? I know that when I first moved to town, I lived over on Catalina and I bicycled to work at the lab, and that was a little bit of a hike. And then I eventually moved down on off Charlotte Way, really close to the lab, and then I bicycled that way. It needs some design. And again, that's not something that just you do overnight. And I think I will just say that the community hopefully can understand that people need to test things. You can design it on paper all you want, but I'm an experimental scientist. So you run an experiment, but not all experiments work. So I imagine when the work actually begins to try some things, people are going to need to be patient until it's figured out.
Okay. Another topic. Why are the costs to provide wastewater service in Livermore so high that the city council, including yourself and former Mayor John Marchand, jacked our sewer rates up in 2020 to a rate nearly twice the rates of those charged for single-family homes in neighboring Dublin, San Ramon, and Tracy?
Okay, another friendly question, unedited. So it's not, you know, it's not easy to get apples to oranges, apples to apples comparisons, right? And let me just say, and I'm a financial analyst as well, there are lots of things you got to think about. And this isn't by way of an excuse, the question is why. So in order to understand why, there's economies of scale. Sewer agencies with large service areas can spread the overhead costs across a greater number. Livermore itself has a much smaller sewer service area than some Bay agencies like East Bay Mud. And the next thing is considered as proximity to the discharge locations. After treating wastewater, it needs to be released into a body of water like a river or the ocean. The closer the treatment plant is to this body of water, the lower the cost. Since Livermore is an inland city with no significant rivers nearby, its wastewater is pumped over 30 miles to the San Francisco Bay. And in the past, I've been on the board that oversees that pumping. So there are definitely costs associated with that. Next factor is age of assets. Newer infrastructure is less expensive to maintain and operate. You know, you look at Dublin, for instance, relatively new city, high growth, new stuff. Livermore is an older city. More than a third of our sewer pipes are over 50 years old, and that requires extensive maintenance. Now, the other thing is, something that I started actually was a really eyes wide open commitment to asset management. And that is really ensuring we've got enough funding to maintain the sewer infrastructure while taking out as few loans as possible. So those are all the different things. So not all cities have all the same factors there. And we have to acknowledge our rates are higher for our single family residence homes than say Tracy or the Dublin services or Dublin San Ramon Service District. They're not quite double, but they are noticeably higher. On the other side, it doesn't make anybody feel good, but our rates are lower than some other Alameda County cities like Oakland and Berkeley. So it depends on the situation. So now just getting a little more particular, the Dublin San Ramon Service District spreads their treatment costs over customers in Dublin, Pleasanton, and part of San Ramon. Tracy, they don't have to pump wastewater to the bay. They discharge into the nearby Old River. And frankly, both of those organizations may not be putting aside sufficient funds for asset management, whereas we're fully funding the capital improvements. And the sewer system isn't something you want to have fail. And then compared to Tracy's, staffing costs are higher here in the Tri-Valley. And use of city property. Here in Livermore, the wastewater enterprise fund pays the city's general fund about $1 million per year as, quote, rent for using the public right of way. These other agencies may not pay a similar fee. And we maintain lower sewer laterals than say Dublin San Ramon. So, and with respect to deferred delayed rate adjustments, other agencies may be in a similar situation that Livermore was in 24 to 15. During this time, Livermore only increased sewer rates one time in the 8-9 timeframe. Now, this matters because in 2020, the council adjusted the sewer services charges, but delayed implementation until 2021 due to the pandemic. And what we've done now is rather than have no rate increases because it's politically good for the city council, we've said, look, you have to have the rate increases every year to cover the cost of living. Otherwise, at some point, the citizens are going to get stuck with 30, 40, 50% increases. So it's much better to pay as you go rather than get in the hole. Now, one last thing I would want to mention, because I think that question was submitted under the topic of Measure P. And just let me say, Measure P is about extending the sewer system into the South Valley to help the wine industry. There is no fee or expectation that the existing ratepayers in Livermore are going to pay for that. The county has put together funding, looking for federal funding and other grants, and then the people who the sewer is extended to would also pay for their hookups. So that isn't going to cost the Livermore taxpayers anything, and in the broad brush. And also, Measure P only authorizes us to do it, but it doesn't require us to do it, and it wouldn't get done if the funding weren't available.
Okay, thank you. We have questions coming in. Do you want to go back to traffic, Sierra? Did you see that one?
Depends, Bob. Do you want to answer more questions about traffic? No.
Or do you want to move the airport?
Well, well, it depends. I mean, I don't want to play in traffic, but
Well,
what do you got? I mean,
yeah, I think we can probably tackle this one. So as Isabel gets fully widened as 84 out to 680, could there be consideration of restricting Concannon traffic to local only or forcing the traffic to bypass that route? A toll for non-residents, perhaps. That's as a question.
I again, going back to the general concept, we like ideas. There are state laws, and you can't jeopardize your and as well as your federal funding. I do know that cities have gone to great effort to sort of discourage people from doing the cut through traffic, what you're talking about. I would personally be in favor of whatever we could legally do. I mean, I live near that area, and if I want to go down Tesla at 3:30 in the afternoon, I don't. I mean, I then go back. I sometimes go to East Avenue to go out that way, which doesn't help East Avenue. So, yeah, I mean, it's what we should consider, in my mind, whatever we can. Now, again, I'm speaking as myself, but that's how I feel about it.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for the questions that are coming in. Airport, let's move on to airport. What are the plans for the Livermore Airport? Do you see it becoming a major hub with operations expanding?
Do you want to pick up the other question there too, and because they're kind of together?
Our question is about the future of the Livermore Airport. We've lived in the Tri-Valley for 20 years and have seen tremendous growth in this area. Once open and undeveloped land is now full of homes. Likewise, the number of aircraft using the Livermore Airport daily is growing year over year. Increased noise from planes using the airport for recreation and commercial charter has become a daily issue for people living in the Tri-Valley. We live only 4 miles from the airport and have planes flying 1,000 feet and lower, crisscrossing our neighborhood. Our family activities are disrupted by their engine noise.
So I think the reason I asked you to read that second question is because there is a considerable concern on those kind of factors that were just mentioned. Now, I'll say, I think it was about 20 years ago, there was a question teed up for the community, what's the future of the airport? Because there was thinking about a significant expansion. And the result of all of that interaction was that the amount of land for development on the airport site was reduced. Now, and we've been living with that reduced vision for the airport since then. Now, there's been a lot of concern about the airport because of the Kaiser Air looking into whether they could expand there. And what that was about was the concern that large jets, 737 type jets, would be coming in. Now, the airport is already certified and those type of jets already can come in. The key question is, would you want to make it possible for those jets to take off with a full load of fuel, passengers, and cargo? That requires extending the north runway, making it longer so that can be done safely. The current policy is no, we don't want that to happen in the vision. I think, and because of all the consternation about the Kaiser Air and frankly, the misinformation that was put out of there, out as a result of that, there's no way through this without a very public process again, in my mind, where the community looks very clearly at what the options are. So it's time, I think, to revisit what's the vision for the airport and reaffirm we're not going to expand that north runway. That's again, my personal belief. That won't be coming to this council, but it possibly could the next. We might, the airport might come to this council just for what thoughts do we have for the future councils, but nothing for us to decide. So the first thing is, what is that vision? And are we good with what we laid out last 20 years ago? Next question is, once you've decided how much of the land you want to develop, and there isn't that much left for, say, hangars, your question is to answer is, what kind of tenants do you want there? And you've got the classic thing is that the airport started out, it's general aviation, a lot of small planes, old military warbirds that are, they're pretty noisy, but they're just for hobbyists. And then over time, you've seen corporate jets show up. Now, the corporate jets, fortunately, have gotten quieter actually over time. And they are an essential part of our vibrant business community in the Tri-Valley. So they have a role here along with the general aviation. But the kind of hangars that you can think about, there are the smaller ones for the small single engine recreational pilot. There are the corporate jets, and then there could be hangars for big jets. So once you've decided the vision for the airport, you say, what kind of hangars do I want? And then you also ask, what kind of tenants do I want? So right now we have voluntary curfew hours, not curfew, but voluntary restraint. What we want, I believe, are business people whose business model is consistent with that. Right now, we've had a lot of complaints because one of the tenants out there, business model is to have jets here that they reposition during those voluntary restraint hours, and that's when they load them up somewhere else with their fuel and passengers. And that's not good. Another thing that somebody's trying to promote is that we think about trying to entice CAL FIRE or the sheriff's office to be there. And they say, oh, public safety. But watch out, because that could be the wolf in the sheep's clothing. Because I don't believe having CAL FIRE here significantly enhances our protection. But what it does do, and also with the sheriff, we're talking helicopter operations, and we're talking about 24/7 operations. So helicopters are noisy, and those tenants are not going to be doing voluntary restraint, because that's not the nature of it, right? So that's an example of what you do. The third thing to consider is you've got how much land what's your vision for the airport? Who do you want there? What kind of hangars do you want to provide and zone for? And then we right now have a waiting list for hangars. They are, it takes estimate 10 years to clear that waiting list. Clearly, those hangars are underpriced, right? Because I think they're below market. So we also have to figure out what's the pricing strategy out there. And if we're going to zone for hangars, and we have a wait list, and we have an idea of who we want at the airport, then that kind of tells you how your zoning is that you would want to use to develop what's left to the airport. And again, that's all in the context of what's the vision for the airport. So I think I've outlined a very complex problem, very significant factors, and they are not, in my mind, isolated. You got to think about it as a whole, and then very rationally design a vision and an execution plan that matches that vision.
Okay. We have a question that takes us back to downtown Eden housing.
Yeah, before we go there, Gina, I had a follow-up question on the airport topic.
Okay.
So in going back to what you mentioned with the re-looking at the vision for the airport and the public process that you mentioned that would need to happen. What would that collaboration look like with Pleasanton and Dublin? I understand there's the Livermore Pleasanton liaison subcommittee. What role would that entity play in this vision, in this process?
There's no, I'll just say, governing role, but Livermore wants to be a good neighbor and listen to what the concerns are and deal with them appropriately. I will say, the airport's been here a long time, and there's sort of a joint responsibility here, because as they start building developments right in the flight path, what are they doing? And if they do that, should there be code requirements on those houses to be triply insulated against noise and things? So they know where the planes are. There's an established pattern as to how you land and take off at the airport. There are some latitude that the pilots have, but not much. I don't know, people may not know, I learned to fly at that airport, so I kind of have some sense of what we're talking about here. And ultimately, the rules at that airport are governed by federal, and the pilot in command in the plane has the ultimate decision-making authority as to what to do to maintain safety.
Thank you. Good question, Sierra. I think this is going to be our final question. And like I said, it's going to take us back to the downtown Eden housing. I don't want to see any more city money, including my tax dollars, spent on fighting a decided issue. When will development, I'm sorry, I'm trying to read the, when will development begin on the remaining elements of the downtown plan, such as the Eden Housing Project and the hotel?
Okay, what I would encourage people to do is this, and I'll just summarize it, but I want to just point out, this is a special edition of the newsletter. Kind of speaks to the downtown. What's on the cover here is this Livermore Plaza with the ball for the nucleus, something that Mayor Marchand was instrumental in making happen. But what I will try and show, if I can, in the middle of this picture is the downtown and all of the pieces around it. So what was mentioned in that question were just a couple. So let me say this. The hotel land and the land for the expansion of the Blacksmith Square, escrow is closing on that, in the next few weeks. Those are the last pieces of land that we need to transfer. The hotel, when it gets going, is dependent on market factors. With the supply chain disruption, the growing cost of construction, financing availability, all of those things have to come together in the right way to make a project pencil. So I talked to the hotelier not that long ago. He's optimistic, but you have to put together a package that's enticing to investors, get the capital and get going. In principle, the hotel could get going in the next year and a half, 2 years, but it's dependent on stuff. We're starting the L Street garage, that's under the city control. Mike Madden, who is working, who owns Blacksmith Square, has submitted his plans to the city for the expansion. They're just beautiful. And again, I encourage people to go look at the newsletter, and it's also available online. I expect him to start construction next year, first quarter. So that's great. The Black Box Theater Spark is well into, it's very encouraged by its fundraising, and they've raised a lot, but they have more to go. And again, that could be several years before they get their whole thing together. Now, with the last piece is Eden, and the whole point of the lawsuits were to block their ability to accept the tax advantage financing from the state. So as soon as the lawsuits are resolved, the project is essentially shovel ready. As I said, the appellate case on Eden is going to be held, and the first lawsuit is held in November. It's conceivable, but again, outrageous if they decide to appeal to the California Supreme Court, but they haven't so far acted rationally. And then the first court case hearing on the second lawsuit is also in November. I predict they'll get crushed. That's a legal term, but then they'll have to think about their options. It's another $500,000 in penalties and things. They have the ability now to back out, but they've spent millions. They seem to have an unlimited amount, and this is about delay. So I can't answer the question on Eden. It could start very soon. Eden could reapply for the tax advantage financing in the first cycle, get the financing awarded. By the end of next year, it could start. And that's good timing, because then the L Street garage will be, pretty much on its way as well. So it just depends on how rational the group of many names wants to be.
Thank you for that answer. Unless somebody in the audience submits a question between now and 7:55, we're going to be done, but I wanted to ask if there's anything you want to talk about that we haven't touched on.
I don't think so. I'm kind of, have exhausted my my ability to keep thinking, but I'm willing to try if somebody wants to prompt me. But I don't have any thing I'm just dying to tell people.
We did get a question. Yeah.
Yes, we did just get a question, and I'm going to ask it, but real quick, I just want to highlight and draw people's attention to chat. Gina dropped in 2 links. One is resharing the e-letter, the city's e-newsletter link, and the other is a link to a web page with info about the status of downtown projects that Mayor Woerner was just talking about. And this question we just received is a good one to kind of close out on, I think. What are you going to do after finishing your mayoral term?
My wife has lots of suggestions. But the other one, I'm a scientist, I'll answer it this way. I've lived in this house for 32 years, and you've heard about the law of thermodynamics, where entropy increases. I'm going to do my best to kind of decrease the mess around here.
Good answer.
And if I can get my health back, I'm going to go sailing.
And our audience member said, good luck fighting that. Well, I want to thank you, Bob, Mayor Woerner, knowing that you came on your own time and took the time to answer a lot of questions. Sierra, thank you for helping. David, thank you. And we got a many thanks from an audience member. this is recording, and a recording will be available on Livermore Vine soon. I don't have any idea how an hour and a half long video will take to render, so but I do want to thank the people who submitted questions and the people who attended tonight. And if you found this valuable and would like to see more of something like this, please drop me a line. It's G Channell or publisher at livermorevine.com. You can also send it to editor at livermorevine.com. And we appreciate your time and your questions. Thank you. And thank you, Mayor Woerner.
And if I may, I want to say thank you to you guys for putting this on. I really want to thank the community for those questions. Frankly, it's quite refreshing to just look at the scope of what we deal with in the city. And there are many important things that we need to focus on. And frankly, I'm looking forward to Eden being in the rearview mirror, where we can then really continue to work on what we need to in this community.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone. And I wish you a good night.
Right.